What's better than dogs, lesbians, and devil worshippers? A society of superhumans and a reminder that men are the worst. Welcome to Detecting the Marvelous. Here we have myself, Shaharah Ghaznavi, as well as my amazing co-host, and also really good men, Matt Ardell and Den.
Yeah, I was. Men are the worst.
We can suck. We can suck a lot.
But yeah,
How are
no,
you
it's
guys
fine. There's
doing?
plenty.
I'm good. Good.
Yeah, good until that last comment. No, yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's a good case made for it. It's very apt intro for sure.
For sure. Oh, thank you. I try my best.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a amazing. I love anytime we get to read about the bearded legend Alan Moore and
Yeah, yeah.
because I do love his stories. I fell in love with him after we talked with Sasha Wood about Tom Strong, and this
Right. Yeah.
happened in its own way. And yeah, what did you guys
Yeah.
think of this one initially?
I find it really interesting because I love Alan Moore as well because of the
Mhm.
variety of stories he tells. Like it can range from supernatural horror to weird erotic love tales and like everything in between. But it's kind of what I thought it was neat about this one is it's kind of like it reads like a Frank Miller book, but from the exact opposite political perspective. And so
Oh,
I was like
right. I
really
see.
excited. Like it's like
Yeah.
men are men and women are women and men protect women and women should like just take it kind of thing. Like there's these characters in there, but it's like where a Miller book is like, yeah, like Sin City or something like that. This is like men are toxic and shitty.
Yeah. It's
So
like
it's kind of
if Sin City learned the right lessons, I guess.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I thought that it was very interesting and yeah, sort of like a fascinating sort of take because I've seen like lots of there's like superhero parodies or other like police procedural type graphic novels, comic books such as like Gotham Central and stuff like that. But this one, yeah, it was just very different, and he just goes like whole hog like 100% into this very weird bizarre world and you just dive into it. It doesn't like there's
Yeah,
no like intro or like sort of
that's kind of what I liked
like
about
there's
it is that it really threw you into this superhuman world that we just accept that it's not just these group of people that have superpowers. It's like kind of everyone has some sort of special something, and that was really cool to just be thrown into that world.
yeah.
There's the very opening page. It's kind of an interest. It's almost transitioning you into. Well, it literally is actually transitioning you into it, where you've got Robin Slinger, the main character, on the subway from like I don't. It never really is. It lets you just. It doesn't give you the. It world builds on the go because you have her transitioning from like quote unquote normal world
Yeah.
on the subway. There's normal people, there's a stop, all of them get off, and then all of these science heroes, as he calls it, get on, and then it goes into Neopolis, like the city. Um, so it's like this transition from normalcy to the insanity that is the top 10 kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's a like I remember Marvel, there's a period where whenever I'd read like a new issue of something, it would have like a list of the character, like sort of like these little bios, like a couple sentences of each character that's going to be in the issue, and then be like, well, here we're going to catch you up on what happened last time. Even if it was like an issue one, it would be like when they did like Heroes Reborn and stuff, it would be like, well, just so you know, in case you didn't hear it, like, all this happened and now like we're back here and this is what's going on, to make sure that like you were on that, like you knew why this character was starting at this point. Whereas, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that because I mean, obviously they're trying to get to as big of an audience as possible. This one is like, boom, go,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but yeah, if you want, I can start off with some history because I'll get into how like eventually they did actually do a prequel afterwards and stuff like that. But
Ooh,
Yeah, that'd be
yeah,
great.
here,
please
yeah.
enlighten
So
us.
this was fun. This was really so it was fun to do. Like so, Top 10. It debuted in September 1999. Was written by Alan Moore with art by Gene Ha and Xander Cannon. Colors by Wildstorm FX and lettering by Todd Klein, who is basically like the letterer in the comic book world. I didn't realize this. He's won 17 Eisner Awards and 9 Harvey Awards. He's like the
Oh.
Meryl Streep of comic book lettering. Like,
Incredible.
like just yeah, like just like ridiculously accoladed. Um, and it's funny because when I'd be reading it, like there'd be parts where I'm like, this kind of reminds me of Sandman, and he was the guy who designed all the iconic lettering for Sandman, where like each character has their own lettering style. So I thought that was kind of cool to see, and even with thematically, whereas Sandman is mostly with gods and mythological beings, and Top 10 morely focuses on like the superhero tropes, um, working both as like an homage and a parody. It was also heavily influenced by 80s and 90s police procedurals, particularly Hill Street Blues, which Moore says was a very direct inspiration. And with it comes like a lot of the typical police show tropes, such as the Libra killer was inspired by the Scorpio killer from Dirty Harry, which was in turn also influenced by the real life Zodiac killer, and also how it portrays racism, like, you know, where they have these like Smacks, who is like kind of like a racist cop, but only towards like, you know, lizard beings. And like, so you have these fantastical things. And like later on, there's like a robot ghetto, and there'll be like derogatory comments made about shark lawyers that may or may not be Jewish because their last name's Fishman. And there's like
I
one
didn't
comment
catch that.
where like one cop says, he's like, hey, sharks aren't like that, we're actually very intelligent. He's like, oh, I wasn't talking about the shark part of you. um but like stuff like that I thought was like, you know, very like these like clever sort of ways of depicting it, even though it came afterwards. Remind me also of like, you know, The Wire, where the cops aren't yeah, like it's not showing, you know, the thing where like the cops are always the saviors, you know, like it's not a Chicago PD kind of world. It is like a Hill Street Blues, or, you know, like The Shield, The Wire kind of world, with how the cops are. Um, and the creative team coming together for Top 10 was very much like this Avengers Assemble type story of like forming a superhero creative team. Gene Ha was a big fan of Alan Moore ever since he was in high school, and you know, his dream was to work with Alan Moore at one point. And he told his friend and fellow artist Alex Ross, who had worked with Moore, who then said, yeah, like if that's what you want to do, then pursue a path where you can work with Moore. And so when Moore started writing for Wildstorm and was hired over there, Haas sent him samples to saying like, oh, hey, like, can you get like, you know, can you get these into Moore's hands? Moore looked at it and liked it and put it out like, yes, this is an artist who I'd like to contact on an upcoming project. And so Ha was really hoping to get to work on Promethea, and said, I really hope I don't get asked to draw Top 10 because it's all giant city backgrounds and crowd scenes. That would just break me. And then Wildstorm said Moore wanted him for Top 10. And he was like, not Promethea? And they were like, no. And so he was like, well, yes, of course, I'll do it. And so he's had luckily he had like a year to start working on Top 10 before it would get published, but then realized it was just too much work for him as one person to really do it justice. And so he had another artist in mind who he'd worked really well with before, but that artist fell through. And then Xander Cannon came in because they'd met at a comic book signing at a comic book shop in Indiana that had like a terrible turnout, like a really dismal showing, but it gave them a chance to just sit around for a few hours and chat and strike up a friendship, which is like that kind of like two superheroes who meet in like a bad situation, then years later be like, you know what? I know just the guy I need to call in for this. And so, like a year or two later, Cannon moved to Minneapolis, where Ha lived. And so, when this other artist fell through, Ha was like, "Oh, Cannon, like, can you do this?" And they were buddies. They liked each other's works, so they got along. So I don't know if you noticed, and I don't know if I realized this. I don't know, or at least I didn't realize until later on. But so the first 12 pages of the first issue were drawn by Gene Ha on his own, but then afterwards it is the two of them working together. So the style does shift halfway through that first issue, where then they really started coming together, and they both loved each other's work. They worked really well together. And when you hear them, when you like read interviews of them talking about working on that project, like Gene Ha is all like, "Oh man, look at what like Xander Cannon did to like where because Gene Ha had to design before they even started writing anything or like drawing anything. He had to design all the main characters, but then Xander came in and designed all the other like more like side characters or things that
Like
people who
Meester Easter,
pardon
like Meester Easter.
like Meester Easter, yeah, and then Janice, who's like the two-faced
Yeah.
yeah, sort of like receptionist operator. Yeah. So then he had all these really great ideas that he brought to it. And then like literally like the best, yeah, the Meryl Streep of lettering comes in, and you've assembled your Avengers or like Justice League level comic book creation team. Now, that said, Top 10 only lasted 12 issues over the course of 2 years. It did win the Eisner in 2001 for Best Continuing Series and had several spin offs, including a Smacks miniseries in 2003 that was written by Moore and drawn by Xander Cannon, which took place, pardon me, which took place exactly after Top 10 finished. And then in 2005, there was a graphic novel called Top 10 The 49ers, written by Moore and drawn by Gene Ha, which was like the prequel story of how the team, comes together at the, like, the best Neapolis's finest at the 10th Police Precinct end up sort of working together. And Moore then also wrote a short story called Dead Fellas, where the Neapolis superhero cops take on some vampire gangsters. So there was like a bunch of different bunch of different iterations of it afterwards, but it didn't have like a huge run, and it is this thing that just ended up always having a bit of a small cult following.
If there's gonna be a spin-off, of course it's gonna be a Smacks spin-off.
Yeah.
Uh, but you
Yeah.
know what though? Any of these characters are deserving of a spin-off. Like,
Yeah.
Jackie, for example, like would be a
Yeah.
cool character. Or I honestly,
Even like
yeah,
yeah, I was gonna say even Lee, the one who
yeah,
she's like
Lee.
got the painted like her body like chrome, that where she can change the color and patterns on her body.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, which is yeah, a great bit that how it's addressed in the comic.
Yeah, and
I mean, I think you could.
her and her dynamic with Irma is even like one of my favorite parts of the comic. So like a duo there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like that would be
Yeah.
great just to see like an issue just focusing on them. Like where they're like having a side, like a side story like that would be really cool.
Absolutely, because there's
Even like the throwaway characters, like the Zen cabbie, who's not he comes back, but like
Yeah.
that's just fun and silly concept. There's so much in any panel from a character point of view, from a story point of view, that
Mhm.
you could take anything out and build a story from it.
For sure. Which is why I can also say like I can see why it was so daunting for the artists.
Mhm.
Because like it is very detailed with everything, and like there's lots of because even there'll be like the ongoing like what's it called, the ghostly goose or whatever, who's like just
yeah,
Yeah.
like sort of like women in the background constantly reporting having their butt grabbed by this like ethereal ghostly character. Yeah.
So one of like I'm glad I got an opportunity because like I love Alan Moore, and he often deconstructs a genre, and this is like one of those few opportunities where we got to see him deconstruct like multiple genres simultaneously. Like he's
Yeah.
Yeah.
deconstructing the detective noir with Smacks, the rookie cop drama with Robin,
Yeah.
the superhero genre, which he calls science heroes, with like the just the world all at the
Mhm.
same time. And yeah, it's just is it was I like this book. I yeah, it's not something that a lot of, like you said, it has a cult following, and it but I really enjoy the world that he creates here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like too much, at all, and all things kind of weave into each other. Things that I thought would be more present were actually just more fun, sort of like the Zen cabbie. I thought that he was gonna have like a bigger role, and maybe he does in the later issues, but I didn't realize he was just like kind of for fun, like which I really appreciated.
Yeah. I will say, yeah, because this doesn't like have with like usual, even though it does have that like police procedural aspect to it, it wasn't, and it was something that took me a little while to get used to it. But once I got into it, I was like, cool. Where it isn't like this is the crime that we're focusing on this issue. This is like each issue like it kind of jumps around. There's a few things going on, and like there's different there's like, like three or so main cases. It's not like a clear like this is the A plot. Like this will be the A plot for a bit, but then that it becomes a B plot and then it'll come back again. And so there's a lot of like interweaving of stories where it doesn't, yeah, like follow that again, like another like not following the like mainstream sort of like this to this to this to this kind of way.
Well, do you guys want me to run through the beats of these first seven
Please,
issues?
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So Robin Slinger, the daughter of a retired cop from the top 10, Colonel Lilliput, is in a world filled with superpowered people with a very different history. Through the course of the first series, we come to identify with her as our through line in this wild world. Powers are compared to a gym. Her powers are sort of small compared to some of her colleagues. Like there's a gymnast with clothes that can shift and change, a talking dog and an exoskeleton, and her partner, an indestructible person who fires force beams from their chest. And those are just the more normal superpowered people that she
Yeah.
hangs out with. Now, not to question Alan Moore, but I have to wonder how much he knows about actual police work, because just there's moments like when Robin is just dropped in and assigned to a problem officer. There's like no actual order to their shifts. People come and go as they please. There's a huge lack of discipline that can only be described as chaos incarnate. Um, but what he lacks in police procedural components here, he makes up for world character and story. Because I think he realized in reading this is like this isn't important. Like the you know Brooklyn Nine-Nine may be super accurate in how it represents the life of a police officer, but that doesn't serve the story here, kind of thing. And he focused on what works, and it kind of feels like the world, if wa- uh, from Watchmen, if Doctor Manhattan was just like one of many blue dudes with world altering
Yeah.
superpowers. Um, so the lack of procedure leads us to be thrown headfirst into the story, with Robin experiencing murder investigations, drug busts, domestic calls, and more, all in the first couple of weeks. Like any cop drama, you have a central case that runs through the show. This being the first set of 7 issues, it feels sort of like one episode of a show.
Mm.
Um, we're introduced to Peregrine, a super strong woman detective with the power of flight, and Jack Phantom, a woman detective who can phase through objects. They are the lead detectives on the Libra case, a case with a long running serial killer case who emerges in October, leaving headless sex workers in their wake. Over the course of the story, we see giant monsters and their punk ass kids, robots, psychokinetic Santa, and a whole host of fun stuff ranging from atomic cats who are used to hunt super powered mice, a bar a bar called Gods where gods go to drink and act like gods, in short, total a-holes, and casual racism, sexism, and homophobia that people wanted to do, from people that wanted to do good but have been broken by a system that's corrupt and failing. Which is which is interesting because this series seems to illustrate what can turn a good person bad in many ways. Um, the Lieber case is a simple through line. It's an interesting plot used to drive the story forward and introduce us to characters, ultimately turning out to be an alien sex worker who had gone into hibernation to metamorphose into something else in her next life stage. Because, of course, Alan
As it
Moore.
happens, as one
Yeah,
does.
as one does. But the real story is the setup set up in the opening few pages when Saddles, a runner for an evil super scientist turned drug maker, is found dead. Saddle's sidekick Boots is tracked down using also another character set up in the opening pages, the Zen cabbie we spoke about, which is all to set up a larger mystery that spans the entire series, not just the top 10, but the multiverse. Because, yeah, top 10 is just one precinct in a multiverse that's all shades of reality, weirder than the last. Um, but it's a neat taste of a dark and dirty world with a well intentioned but broken individuals trying to do right. So yeah, I kept it a little vague. There's mystery there, I don't want to
Yeah,
go
for
too much,
sure.
but it's also so dense. It's hard to summarize. It's
Yeah,
just there's so much going on every panel. Um,
for
and
sure.
like
I found
like
it. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna
yeah,
say I found it took me longer to read this than a lot of other issues or things we've done that would be 6 or 7 issues long, just because there's so much. Like
oh
everything
yeah,
from like stuff that's in the background, like a there's like a delivery service that is not offering same day delivery but previous day delivery. So they make sure they make sure your packages get here yesterday. Like
yeah,
and and then there's also yeah, like sort of so you'll have all those kinds of background stuff, but you'll have like, yeah, like the ghostly goose conversations happening in the background of a bigger thing. Someone's listening to some like robot rap music or so like those lyrics will be there and there'll be like other stuff going on while also like these bigger conversations happening, and
yeah.
people are having two conversations at once because there's multiple stories they're talking about. And
Yeah.
yeah.
The incredible little. So you didn't get to this issue, Shahara, but a certain blue box point pops up at one point in a later issue that you
What?
might be interested in. It's just in a
And you
single
told me
panel
only to read
flying
until
by.
issue 7? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's also stuff like there's a truck bed loaded with Modocs at one
Hilarious.
point. It's just like a truck of Modocs, and
Oh
it's just
wow.
different colored Modocs. Or, but you got like the Church of the Great Hole in the ground, a literal
Yeah.
Doctor Octopus, power rings and things. There's a V for Vendetta joke reference hidden in the background at one point. The pharmacy RX Min, the
Right,
like
yeah,
instead
so
of
there's
X-Men
that's
and
funny.
sidekicks boy band, there's a guy who's totally dressed like Wolverine. The Rat Fink Hot Rods make an appearance at one point. So it's just like they just play with this world in a way that
Yeah.
I found really fun.
Yeah, it wouldn't be Alan
Yeah.
Moore if there weren't like a bunch of little jokes written out in the background of something so you catch it, or like whether it's that the sergeant's list of what their to-dos are and his bullet points are just all jokes. It's like they're going to talk about
Yeah.
this and they're going to talk about it's framed very very well, and it wouldn't be Alan Moore if it wasn't.
Yeah.
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 One of the sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 go ahead. I was just gonna say, yeah, like lots of little like Easter eggs and stuff like that.
Yeah. And one of the things I found interesting, because like there's like clicker, like the term that they're using for, what are they called, Pharaoh Americans, I think.
Oh right,
Yeah,
yeah.
like, yeah.
I'm
It's
trying to remember.
interesting because like if there's any other comic book writer, I would think it was just coincidence that they took, because robot literally translates into slave. That's
Right.
what the word means. And that to use that to have African American culture overlaid onto this robotic culture. Any other writer, I would say that's a coincidence, but with Alan Moore, I am sure he was like, how can I represent these robots as a distinct culture? Well, what culture has a similar life experience? And you probably look like, well, slaves, African Americans were used as slaves, and sort of drew that
Right.
connection. Um, but
I
it's
didn't.
just
Yeah, I hadn't
it's
even thought of that. But yeah, I'm positive he would have like that was intentional.
yeah, and it's just it's a fleshed out world where, but you don't aren't handheld. Like you
Yeah,
never like it's like you have all of this chaos, but it feels real and grounded just because it adheres to the logic of the universe that it's set in.
for sure. And even like character interactions being very like sort of being grounded in like sort of very like our own real world, but like still just in the representation of this. Like a clever bit like when Sung Lee finds out that the dog, her sergeant, is colorblind, and then like realize so like she has like all these colors that like change on her body strategically so that people can't see her full frontally naked because she doesn't wear clothes. But then so then she just goes up and punches him, and then he gives this explanation where I'm like, at first I was like, really? That's she's gonna buy that? Like sort of being like, oh, like I'm just a dog. How could I, And I'm actually dating this boar's eye pup named Mitzi, and she's like, oh, that's a sweet name. I'm sorry, this was just a misunderstanding. And then later on, he like you see him talking to someone. He's like, and she was buying it, so and I was like, oh, I knew it. Like that
Yeah.
was like that seemed like such a half-assed explanation. Um, and it's not like an big plot point. It's just something that like kind of like gets brought up or like mentioned, be like, oh, why did you punch the sergeant? It's like, oh, it was a
Yeah.
misunderstanding, don't worry about it, kind of thing.
And at the same time, he's also one of the most charming characters in the
Yeah,
entire story. Like he's the one who, and I mean, I think it's interesting because you have this recurring theme where people are nervous or stressed out. Then he comes in because he's a dog; they feel safe because everybody
right, and
loves
he's
a pet
comforting.
dog. Um, but so he's a dog, like in the
Yeah, he's a
colloquial
dog.
sense,
Yeah,
So it's like it's just this multi-layered. But I mean, like
yeah,
even and then you have people like Dwayne, the cowboy,
Yeah.
guy who
yeah,
surface read a-hole, just like this macho strutting cowboy. But
yeah,
he and headed Pete very much feel like well-intentioned idiots.
Yeah.
Like
hmm,
they don't mean to be bad. They're just slow-witted in certain ways. Like Pete lets go Immunity Girl, who becomes a victim of the Libra killer because he's just like he felt for her. He's like this kid
yeah.
didn't want
And
to
I
run
feel
her
like when I
in.
read that, I was like, oh, he seems like he's doing the right thing. Like he's
Yeah.
not,
Yeah,
I feel like I
he's
would've
being in.
yeah, I would've probably done the same thing. You're like, "You know what? You go on, but be safe." And then obviously we know what happened, but yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and then you got Dwayne, and then later on in like issue 6 or 7, when he's with Jax and he's
yeah,
flirting with her, not to really flirt with her, but to cheer her up,
Yeah.
and because he knows her and knows this is what she wants to hear to feel
yeah,
positive. Because he had like Irma saying, "Oh, he's like using the D word and stuff like that," and you had like
yeah,
so you have this homophobia, but it's the worst, and what I feel is the worst kind of discrimination, which is just that sort of passive, low level discrimination that permeates a lot of workplaces and environments where it's not intentional. Like intentional discrimination is something you can confront easily.
Yeah.
yeah,
It's the culture of toxicity that's much harder. And
yeah,
so here's Dwayne. He's kind of flirting with her, and he puts his life in danger to save her from the Zodiac or from the Libra killer.
yeah,
He putting his body in the line and getting his guns chopped up and stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
he's very chivalrous in that moment, like, very much being
yeah,
like, phase out so that she can, like, be, protected, and then he'll, like, take the brunt of it, and, like, he really is very thoughtful. And then also with his mom later on,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
he goes
His
to help her
character
with his mom.
absolutely had a heart of gold, and I think that he was the one who was feeling a lot of grief and guilt after, um oh shoot, I can't remember his name, but the Russian, not the Russian scientist, but the scientist, used his
oh
gun
yeah,
to kill himself.
Right, the
Grumkov
guy
or
yeah,
something.
the
Yeah,
guy they're interrogating who takes his gun and kills
In
himself, yeah.
Exactly,
yeah,
and, in a sense, like, not feeling macho-ish about, like, or at least it hadn't crossed his mind that he could get help, and that, he was feeling
Right.
this guilt, and they're like, "Yeah, that's not the greatest way to feel, and also it's completely fine that you feel that way because what happened to you is kind of traumatic, and you shouldn't have to hold that." And him accepting,
Right,
like,
yeah.
his arc as a character was one of my favorites, and I wasn't expecting it to be one of my favorites.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah. And his like lusting after that saddle, like, oh, I could ride this. This would just be so perfect with my theme. And it's like, really
Yeah.
thinking about that?
It reminded me of, like, in Wayne's World when he looks at the guitar and he's like, "Oh, she will be mine. Yes, she will be mine."
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, Matt's getting a call in the middle of the
Yeah, it's
episode.
from Alan Moore himself.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I'd be like, "Matt, we need you over at Neapolis right away."
Off we
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
uh,
Smacks has got another groundbreaking case that you
now Smacks is an interest. Like I like first 7 issues. Robin is really the through line.
Mhm.
I feel, even though if you read up about it, it lists Smacks as the main character, and he's the one who gets a
mm,
spin off. I think his is a more long term arc because this is at least like he softens by the end of these issues, but he's really hard to connect with. I find
yeah,
like that's the one criticism. I mean, it's not necessarily
yeah,
criticism because we're 7 issues into like a two, like about halfway through
yeah,
um the main story because there's 2 seasons. But I mean, he's such a dumbass. Like,
mhm,
like he escalates everything,
yeah,
and but that's kind of in a way that's also grounded in a realism, um, because he's mourning the loss of a partner, so he's doing
right,
stupid things because he doesn't want to be alive, but at the same time, he's indestructible and can't die. So he's
yeah,
picking fights with like I loved the drunken Godzilla analog that shows
yeah,
up.
yeah,
And they're like, we're no Uncle Gojira. And I'm like, whoa, I think Godzilla might have a thing or two to say about being called that.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's like, whoa. But
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I do.
And
And like yeah, like how he just like goes like they're like calming down the lizard, and then he comes in and he's like, "Oh, ready for another ass kicking, eh?" Or
yeah.
like, and then when he like gets in at the Gods bar, when he gets into a fight with I think he punches out the God of Evil.
Yeah.
Like,
No, he punches out Thor.
oh, he
So
punches out Thor.
yeah,
Yeah,
and that's another thing too. Is like another a tangent here, but I love like the smartness things are written with by Alan Moore because
mhm,
the way he's portraying, like in that God's bar, you have um like it's the same kind of detail, like how there was a literal Doctor Octopus in the prison,
right.
an octopus with a stethoscope.
Yeah,
So Doctor Octopus, it's the same layer in Gods, where he and Neil Gaiman have some of the most actually realistic portrayals of Nordic gods in comics because they become such go-to. This is sorry, I'm getting into it.
yeah,
They're like Thor and Loki and all of these characters are so go-to with comic books, and both like you know DC and Marvel touch them because they can both plumb them infinitely. But Thor was an idiot and brash and big and bold. They were vain and headstrong, and so you have this God's bar where all the other gods are like Jesus Christ. The Norse gods are making a scene again. They're such
yeah,
trash, and Loki is kind of just fucking with all of them, and he's got like in Loki. One of the things he can do, you don't see this, he can control fire, so that's why he has a flaming beard.
Right.
Like this
Yeah.
is like these are they know their mythology, but also even the graffiti is intelligent.
Yeah.
Um, like so you've got Oedipus is a mother effer.
Oh my god, yes!
Right. Yeah.
Again, like, yeah,
Yeah,
the smart humor in the background. Continue, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you got Oedipus
Yeah.
is a mother effer. Don't calliope on your shoes. Um, one god, sun god, rah rah rah. Just
Yeah.
I suck at Cheryl and then a phone number, and you can guess what's cut off. But that's a mythical monster in Odyssey and Jason and the Argonauts that creates a whirlpool. And there's actually a saying, that a Greek saying that came out of that that sailors use when in trouble, like caught between the straits of something in Cheryl, which means there's no good choice. So it's just
Oh,
like,
okay.
and there's like just and there's one that's cut off that I'm like, oh, I really wish I could see the rest of that frame to know what that reference is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like everything is so smart and so informed.
Even like the
Um,
little like racism from the Greek gods towards the like German slash Norse gods being like, before the German gods showed up, like we could enjoy the place, but they're like those gods, like those people, like
yeah, yeah,
very
yeah,
like a very fun way of yeah, like sort of yeah.
yeah, and even like Janus, which that is a Roman god.
Yeah.
She's the
With
Roman
two
god of
faces looking
two
backwards and
faces.
forwards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like so it's just like these
Yeah.
like if you didn't like read the encyclopedia as a child like I did,
Yeah.
like there's so much that would be lost there.
Yeah. And then stuff like little like fun touches like Janice then like her two faces arguing like I'm gonna tell them. No, I want to tell them. Like, oh, you're such a
Yes,
glory hog. Like
yeah. Yeah, and
like
and
lots of
I
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say like lots of great little personality. Like each like even a character that's just there for like a couple of panels like has its that person's personality fleshed out.
Yeah, like
Absolutely.
in the issue 6 or 7, the Santa issue.
I think it's like 6.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
Yeah, that's six.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's kids following the psychokinetic escapee from the asylum who's and you
Yeah.
see like these poor reindeer, one of them just like dies
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
the shock and exertion. But there's this one little robot kid who's like
Yeah.
exclamation, hooray, Santa!
Yeah.
Declaration, aww. Like
Yeah.
just
Favorite.
that touch with the dialogue is like so wonderful.
Yeah, they just like it has a couple moments where like you see like robot character talking, and it's like, oh, I like got a great feel for like what this robot kid's like.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. It was rightly absurd, like and also the humor, like this points of humor in was just hilarious. Like just Rudolph the dead ass reindeer, or like again like Irma and Sun Lee. There was like only what I could describe as like a cold open to like the second issue, where Irma's like, "Wait, so you're naked? Like I'm driving a naked person right now?" Is basically what you're telling me.
Yeah,
And she's like, "Yeah," and that's like that was quite funny, and the relationship that they found with humor.
yeah,
When
and they get along well, but like she Irma kind of uses like an Asian slur, but then Sung Lee calls her cracker, and like they all like yeah, so like it's kind of like they're like saying things that aren't like yeah they're saying sort of like certainly like on PC, not the nicest things to each other, but they still very much get along and respect each other.
For sure. I mean, and kind of like what Matt was saying earlier, like when, like, the use of the D word, or like, being like, oh, you're not
Right.
one of those like liberal, like homosexuals or whatever, like to Robin,
Yeah.
and I don't know that, like things like that were just continuing to pop up, and again, it's like a systemic, in
Yeah.
yeah, or like not like a forefront of like racism or, or homophobia, but it doesn't exist within this kind of realm. But
For
And
sure.
one of the things I found kind of interesting about this is like I think every one of those cops went in wanting to be good people, and it slowly broke them down. I think that is the through line. I
Yeah.
think for Smats, um, is like he didn't want to be this racist kind of dick, but he got broken by like family trauma and his partner dying and all of this other stuff slowly eroded his moral compass.
Mm.
Hmm.
And it's kind of an interesting story because it's like, you know, it's usually like this black or white, cops are good, cops are bad, whereas like this is more cops are human, even if
Yeah.
they're superhuman cops, they're still human
Yeah.
inside.
Oh, that's such a good tagline. Yeah.
Well,
Cops are
maybe
human, even
cops
if
are human.
they're superhuman. Top 10.
That's going to be my pitch when I go into Amazon.
I think
Yeah.
we gotta pitch it. We gotta put on a shirt. We gotta.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Warner Brothers, call us.
Yeah.
But any final thoughts on top 10?
I
I mean,
didn't
other
real
than it was. No, sorry. Go ahead, Shahara.
I didn't realize that Sarge would just be a dog. Like straight up. Like I
Right.
thought that he was a humanoid dog, but you take away the exoskeleton and he's just a Doberman.
A dog.
Yeah, yeah. That I thought was such a great reveal. I was like, oh, like he's literally like I thought, yeah, like he was like a dog, like robot dog man kind of thing. And then
Yeah,
it's like, oh no, he's just a dog and like a big exoskeleton to keep him standing up.
yeah. Which is maybe not the most relevant point, but just something that I found funny. What were you gonna say, Dan?
Yeah. I was gonna say it was just fun to this like weird kooky like superhero version of The Wire, my favorite show, and then seeing like those kinds of characters, but in this like like yeah, like this superhero-y world.
Well, thanks for letting me expound on one of my favorite comics, and I guess we'll go
Yeah.
out with Book 'em, Dano.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Detecting the Marvelous, a Far From Here and ShowbizMonkeys.com co-production. Your producers are Dan Rosen, Matt Erdill, and Shaharah Ghaznavi. Music by Glenn Bouchamp, and art by Ben Steamroller. Thanks for listening, and remember, true believers, Excelsior!